Hey, this is Dave DeCamp from antiwar.com. This is anti-war news for Friday, July 26th, 2024. All right, the first story at the top of antiwar.com today. Netanyahu meets with Biden and Harris. So Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu on Thursday held separate meetings with President Biden and Vice President Kamala Harris at the White House as Israel is looking to clinch more U.S. support for its genocidal campaign in Gaza. While meeting with Biden, Netanyahu praised the president for his strong support since October 7th and for backing Israel throughout his 50-year political career. Netanyahu said, quote, from a proud Israeli Zionist to a proud Irish-American Zionist, I want to thank you for 50 years of public service and 50 years of support for the state of Israel, end quote. And Biden is the guy that all the Republicans say has abandoned Israel, but Netanyahu seems very happy with him. And then after her meeting with Netanyahu, Harris claimed that she was concerned with the massive civilian casualties in Gaza, but said that she would always back Israel. So you'll see some headlines about her saying, she says she's not going to remain silent on the suffering in Gaza, but ultimately she expressed very strong support for Israel. She said, quote, I told him that I will always ensure that Israel is able to defend itself, including from Iran and Iran-backed militias such as Hamas and Hezbollah. From when I was a young girl collecting funds to plant trees for Israel to my time in the United States Senate and now at the White House, I have had an unwavering commitment to the existence of the state of Israel, to its security, and to the people of Israel, end quote. So she has an unwavering commitment to Israel. Ahead of these meetings, a senior administration official told reporters that there was no daylight between the president and the vice president on their position on Israel. Some people were hopeful that Harris might be better than Biden on this, but I just don't see that to be the case here. And Harris also called for a hostage and ceasefire deal with Hamas, something that Netanyahu has been actively working to sabotage. U.S. officials said Biden pressed Netanyahu to reach a hostage deal, and the White House claimed that an agreement was closer than ever, but there was a report from Reuters on Thursday that said Israel's new demands are complicating the talks. Those demands are the things we've been going over. Netanyahu saying he wants to maintain control of the Gaza-Egypt border and to screen Palestinians returning to North Gaza. So Politico reported that while the Israeli delegation is in Washington, Israeli officials are circulating lists among U.S. officials of weapons they want fast-tracked. The report said that Israel was quietly pushing for faster military aid shipments. So they said they were doing it quietly, but this is one of the things that Netanyahu said in his address. He basically demanded, send us weapons faster. I'll read the quote. Of course, he invoked World War II. Nobody invokes World War I. They always got to invoke World War II. He said, quote, in World War II, as Britain fought on the front lines of civilization, Winston Churchill appealed to Americans with these famous words. Give us the tools and we'll finish the job. Today, as Israel fights on the front line of civilization, I too appeal to America. Give us the tools faster and we'll finish the job faster. End quote. So it did not say what exactly they're looking to get fast-tracked. They just want them to ship everything, ship the weapons as fast as possible. All right, so the next one here, the U.S. gives Netanyahu full backing to expand war on Lebanon. This article is from The Cradle. Former Israeli intelligence and security official Yuval Malka told Hebrew media on July 25th that Washington has greenlit a wider war on Lebanon. So this is a former Israeli official. I hope this official is wrong, but he's saying that he knows from sources that the U.S. is giving Israel kind of the go-ahead for a big war in Lebanon. He said, quote, according to the information I received from the delegation and what I know, Netanyahu has received full legitimacy in the United States to wage a war in Lebanon. When he arrives in the country, he is expected to head the Al-Bur in Al-Qurha, and from there he will start the war in Lebanon, end quote. So he was referring to a military complex that houses the headquarters of the Israeli army's different corps. So this is not good. And we also see there's been more reports in Israeli media that they are preparing for a big war in Lebanon. There's also been reports, again, from Israeli media that said the Israeli military is losing its readiness to launch an all-out war against Lebanon and Hezbollah because its forces have been worn out from almost 300 days of fighting in Gaza. So there is that reality, too, that this is going to be, it's really going to stretch Israeli forces thin. I would be surprised I'm not going to be surprised if this happens, but I would be surprised if this is what they do right when Netanyahu gets back, unless they do get some more weapons or some things that they need from the U.S. So far, this is just this former Israeli official saying this. If we see more reports about this, then it's probably likely. That is the U.S. position, is that if there is a full-blown war in Lebanon, they are going to back Israel. Netanyahu knows that, and that's just going to make him more likely to start a war, and he's going to hope that the U.S. Intervenes directly. That's exactly what he wants. All right, so the next one here, U.S. medics who volunteered in Gaza demand an arms embargo on Israel. This article's from The Guardian. So dozens of U.S. doctors and nurses who worked in Gaza have written to Joe Biden claiming that the true death toll from Israel's months-long assault is much higher than previously reported, demanding the U.S. withdraw diplomatic and military support for Israel until there is a ceasefire. The 8-page letter delivered on Thursday and addressed to Biden, the First Lady Jill Biden, and Vice President Kamala Harris, said the medics saw evidence of widespread violations of laws governing the use of U.S. weapons supplied to Israel and of international humanitarian law. 45 surgeons, emergency room physicians, and nurses who volunteered in several Gaza hospitals over recent months laid out what they described as the massive human toll from Israel's attack on Gaza, especially a toll taken on women and children. So this is really something here. I'll read part of the letter. They said, quote, every single signatory to this letter treated children in Gaza who suffered violence that must have been deliberately directed at them. Specifically, every one of us on a daily basis treated preteen children who were shot in the head, end quote. So this is 45 doctors and nurses, Americans who volunteered in Gaza, and they say that all of them treated children, preteen kids who were shot in the head on a daily basis. And this is something we heard, The Guardian reported a few months ago from Israel, hearing this from foreign volunteers in Gaza. We had that Dr. Perlmuddle, the story I went over earlier this week. He said the same thing, that toddlers were getting shot in the head and in the heart, getting shot by snipers twice. And that CBS report that talked to him, they also spoke with 20 other doctors and nurses who volunteered in Gaza who said the same thing. So, this is just horrific. Again, 45 of them. And these are the people who are actually there working in the hospitals. And they actually also believe, their estimate is that it's likely the death toll from this conflict is already greater than 92,000. So they think more than 92,000 people have been killed and died of things like disease and starvation. They said, quote, with only marginal exceptions, everyone in Gaza is sick, injured, or both. This includes every national aid worker, every international volunteer, and probably every Israeli hostage, every man, woman, and child, end quote. They say epidemics are raging. So that number that they're estimating, 92,000, is 4.2% of Gaza's population. So this letter, hopefully somebody reads it and I don't know. You think they know what's going on, but the fact that kids are getting shot in the head, little young children getting shot in the head by a military funded and armed by the U.S., that should be a huge scandal. It should be a story everywhere, but it's just, feels like there's such little attention on this now. All right, so the next one here, Israeli snipers are firing at anyone who is moving in Khan Younis. This article is from Common Dreams. At least 129 people have been killed in the last 5 days of Israeli shelling and artillery fire in the southern Gaza city of Khan Younis, where the Israeli Defense Forces earlier this week gave people a couple of minutes to evacuate. And this is according to Al Jazeera reporter Hind Kudari. So Al Jazeera reported on Thursday that the vast majority of the dead and injured are women and children, as Israeli snipers have been deployed in the city and are firing at Palestinians indiscriminately. And if this is a no-go zone, that means that they'll shoot at anybody who stays, who is still in that area. And right now, 83% of Gaza has been evacuated or is considered one of those no-go zones. Tarek Abu Azum said that the snipers are shooting anyone who is moving, and this is the eastern part of Khan Younis, which is the main target of Israel's current assault. So this is what's happening as Netanyahu is getting this warm reception in Washington, D.C. And then Friday, he's going to meet with Trump at Mar-a-Lago. All right, so the next one here, Biden claims the U.S. is not at war as he bombs Yemen. So on Wednesday night, this was Biden's address about dropping out of the presidential race. He falsely claimed that the U.S. was not at war. He said, quote, "I'm the first president in this century to report to the American people that the United States is not at war anywhere in the world," end quote. And it's amazing he said that the same day Netanyahu gave his big address. So a half hour before Biden came out and made this address, U.S. Central Command announced that the U.S. bombed Yemen that same day. I mean, it's just completely absurd. And since January, the U.S. has carried out hundreds of strikes in Yemen. And for long stretches, there's been daily U.S. airstrikes in Yemen over this year. And this is a new war. It's not officially declared a war, but this is a war, and it has not been authorized by Congress. And the U.S. has been at war in Yemen in one form or another for a long time now. But this is a new thing, direct combat with the Houthis. And U.S. naval commanders have actually described the fighting in the Red Sea as the largest naval battle that the U.S. has been involved in since World War II. And you have President Biden saying that the U.S. isn't at war. And the U.S. has also been involved in combat operations against ISIS remnants in Iraq and Syria. Earlier this month, CENTCOM said that it had been involved in 196 operations in both countries in the first half of 2024. And then the U.S. troops who are in Syria, the government doesn't want them there. That means that it's an illegal military occupation. So U.S. troops are occupying a foreign country. And the U.S. and also the fighting with the Shia militias. We'll get into that a little more in the next story. And the U.S. has bombed Somalia several times this year. They're supporting the Mogadishu-based government against al-Shabaab there. So it's just completely absurd for him to say that. And, people try to say, oh, this isn't war. These are, they call them police actions. But tell that to the people on the other side of the bombs that they're not at war with the U.S. And then besides the direct combat, the U.S. is also providing vast amounts of military aid and intelligence to Ukraine and to Israel, of course, and is so involved in Gaza and the proxy war in Ukraine. And this is the closest, for Joe Biden to say, oh, I'm the first president in this century who could say we're not at war. He's the one who's brought us closer to a direct war with Russia than at any point in history, at any point during the Cold War. So it's just, man, I know he's, his brain's not working well, but I guess this just works on people because unfortunately a lot of people don't pay attention to this stuff and might not even realize that the U.S. is at war. All right, so the next one here, rockets fired at U.S. base in Iraq, no casualties reported. On Thursday, multiple rockets were fired at a U.S. base in Iraq, an attack that came after U.S. and Iraqi officials held talks on the future of the U.S. military presence in the country. According to Reuters, the attack targeted the Ain al-Assad air base, and no casualties or damages were reported. U.S. officials said the base itself was not hit by the rockets. So these rocket attacks have been more rare lately, but from October 2023 until February of this year, U.S. bases in Iraq and Syria came under hundreds of rocket and drone attacks. Iraqi Shia militias launched the attacks in response to U.S. support for the Israeli onslaught in Gaza. And after 3 U.S. troops were killed in an attack on Tower 22, which is a secretive U.S. base in Jordan on the Syrian border, Iran and the Iraqi government pressured the militias to stop, and there have only been a handful of attacks since February. The Iraqi militias fall under the umbrella of the Popular Mobilization Forces, the PMF, which are officially part of Iraq's security forces. So you have the U.S., backing the Iraqi military, but also fighting this wing of it. So, and the PMF militias, specifically Kateb Hezbollah, which I believe is like the most powerful one, they want the U.S. to withdraw, and they have been pressuring Prime Minister Mohammed Shia al-Sudani to expel U.S. forces. So early this week, I covered that story that said the Iraqi government wants the U.S. to start drawing down troops in September. And then they want them to end the mission of the anti-ISIS coalition next September 2025. But it leaves room for the U.S. keeping troops in another capacity. So they just had they had meetings on this on Tuesday and Wednesday, U.S. and Iraqi officials. They released a whole long statement that said a whole lot of nothing. There was no timeline, like we're going to start pulling troops out in September. We're going to do this. So I'm guessing that these rocket attacks might be a response to that. So similar attacks happened after al-Sudani went to Washington, I think back in May, and he came away with nothing, with no commitment for a U.S. withdrawal. There was a few rocket attacks, but they didn't keep up. So we'll see if this could just be a one-time thing. But the U.S. is determined to stay in Iraq, putting the U.S. troops there in danger, and it's just a tripwire for a big war, of course. So it always is. All right, the next one here, legal filing delays ICC warrant for Netanyahu. So this one is from Kyle Anzalone at the Libertarian Institute. The pending International Criminal Court arrest warrant for Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu will be delayed by several months as the ICC will hear legal briefs from a number of countries, including Israel's allies. In May, ICC prosecutor Karim Khan issued a request to the court to issue arrest warrants for Netanyahu, Israeli Defense Minister Yoav Gallant, Hamas leader Yahya Sinwar, military chief Mohammed al-Masri, and another Hamas political leader Ismail Haniyeh for war crimes committed in southern Israel and Gaza. So a lot of people, I think, don't realize, and it is confusing, that what the prosecutor did was request the warrants. They haven't formally issued them yet. They're planning to, but now there's all this legal briefs and kind of challenges to these warrants that they're getting. On Monday, the court signaled that it would not rule on the request for several months. The ICC accepted about 70 legal briefs arguing for and against issuing the warrants. Some of the arguments were submitted by Israeli allies, such as the U.S. and Germany. Countries and organizations may continue submitting briefs for another week. The briefs in favor of Netanyahu will likely argue that the ICC does not have jurisdiction over Israeli officials. While Israel is not a party to the treaty that created the court, if the ICC issues an arrest warrant for Netanyahu, it could present problems for the Israeli leader. And the Palestinians are a party to the ICC, the Palestinian territories. So that is the kind of the talking point that the U.S. uses, is that Israel's not a party to the court, yet they back the court going after Putin, even though not only is Russia not a signatory to the court, neither is Ukraine. All right, so the next one here, Republican senators introduce bill banning boycotts of Israel. This article is from Middle East Eye. 12 Republican U.S. senators have introduced the Countering Hate Against Israel by Federal Contractors Act, which would prohibit federal contracts with entities that boycott Israel. The lead sponsor, Senator Jim Risch of Idaho, said in a press release that businesses who boycott Israel only seek to normalize anti-Semitism, of course. His move follows the same bill's introduction in the House of Representatives in July of last year. So what this is there's anti-BDS laws on the books in over 30 U.S. states. 28 states currently prohibit agencies from working with companies that boycott Israel, while 6 others passed similar bills in the form of some executive order. So it's about 34 American states. And what these laws do is they punish, say if you're a contractor, this has happened to a few people, but it happens to companies as well. There's a few cases that became kind of high profile. Abby Martin, who's a journalist who's very critical of Israel. It's kind of her whole thing. She was supposed to give a speech at a university in Georgia. I guess it was a state school, and she had to sign a contract that said she does not now and pledges never to boycott Israel. And it happened to a substitute teacher or someone, a Palestinian American woman in Texas, and that was kind of a high-profile case too. And so that's what these laws do. And they also allow the states to divest from companies who boycott Israel. And, we say boycott Israel, but that's a pretty loose term because what happened with Ben & Jerry's was they said they were going to stop selling ice cream just in settlements, which are considered illegal by everybody except for Israel, basically. And even the Israeli Supreme Court considers, them illegal. But whatever. Anyway, so they just said they were going to stop selling ice cream in the West Bank and East Jerusalem, basically. And Israel, pressured American states and governors to go after them, and about 6 or 7 states started divesting from Unilever, which is the parent company of Ben & Jerry's. It's a British conglomerate now that owns them. But so they punish, American companies. I know Ben & Jerry's is owned by a British conglomerate, but they're an American company. They're still based in Vermont. Punishing companies and people, individuals who, for boycotting Israel. It's a real threat to the First Amendment, of course. So they've been wanting this at the federal level for a long time. So that's what they're trying to do here. But we'll see where it goes. I think if it ever makes it to the Supreme Court, it would be struck down. But there was an Arkansas anti-BDS law that was appealed at one point. The U.S. Supreme Court opted not to review it. I'm not really sure the details of that case. All right, so the next one here. Top U.S. general says that the U.S. could beat China in a war. So Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, General Charles Q. Brown, has said he is fully confident that the U.S. could beat China in a war that breaks out over Taiwan. When asked at the Aspen Security Forum last Friday if he thought the U.S. could defeat China, Brown said, quote, "Yes, I'm fully confident in our force. We are the most lethal, most respected combat force in the world. Now it's going to take all the nation if we go to conflict with the PRC, and I'm confident if we're challenged, we will be there," end quote. So the PRC is the People's Republic of China. Brown acknowledged the war would be a major conflict and said the U.S. was working to build up military logistics in the Asia-Pacific by stockpiling weapons, ammunition, and other types of supplies. He said, quote, "These will be major conflicts akin to what we saw in World War II, and so we've got to come to grips with that. 2, the PRC knows where our advantages are and the combat capability we can bring to bear. My sense is they'll want to go quick so they can do it before we can bring capability there," end quote. So he framed the U.S. military buildup in the region as an effort to deter a war. He said that the U.S. is, again, working to build up stockpiles. This is something apparently that they're doing in Taiwan. They're kind of keeping it a little secretive, but I believe they're building up like a weapons stockpile for the U.S. military in Taiwan. They want to do it in the Philippines and Japan. Of course, they have a bunch of bases in Japan and now expanding in the Philippines. But I mean, here we have, this is kind of a trend that we see, a growing trend. This is the highest ranking officer in the U.S. military saying, yeah, we're getting ready for war with China. And if we fight them, yeah, you better believe we're going to beat them. it's, really crazy to me, at least, because China has nuclear weapons. And this is something that doesn't ever seem to be factored into these conversations that you see. Even the war games that they run, they do a lot of war games over Taiwan. And, it never gets to nuclear escalation. Like, there's no scenarios there. I know one of them said, like, if the U.S. attacked mainland China, it would risk a nuclear escalation. But it just, again, doesn't seem like it's factored in. Another thing with the war games is they do say there is a conventional battle between the U.S. and China over Taiwan. Just in the first few weeks, thousands and thousands. One war game said up to 10,000 American sailors could be killed. I mean, imagine that. That's more than were killed in Iraq. It's just like, it's just crazy that this is what they're planning, and it's really concerning. And it's one of the reasons why I try to make a point to cover this stuff with the Philippines and Japan and alliances that they're building, because this is what they're planning for. I know it might not seem like this is important to them right now with everything going on with Ukraine and Gaza, but the Pentagon says, China's the number one threat. This is the big war that they're preparing for. And they're preparing to fight a direct war, not a proxy war like in Ukraine. All right, so the next one here, NORAD says it intercepted Russian and Chinese bombers in Alaska's ADIZ. So North American Aerospace Defense Command, NORAD, said on Wednesday that U.S. and Canadian fighter jets intercepted 2 Russian and 2 Chinese bombers operating in Alaska's Air Defense Identification Zone, ADIZ. So in ADIZ, a lot of times you see this kind of misrepresented as like a airspace, but it's different. It's an area that extends far beyond territorial waters and airspace where the U.S. wants foreign aircraft to identify themselves. Alaska's ADIZ is a massive area that extends near Russia's coast, where Russian aircraft routinely operate. A U.S. official told Air and Space Forces magazine that this incident marked the first time that the Russian and Chinese militaries entered the area together. Russia and China have been increasing joint military cooperation in recent years, which is a reaction to the increasing military pressure both nations feel from the West. So you see this map of Alaska's ADIZ, and it does go pretty far out. The Chinese Defense Ministry confirmed that China and Russia conducted a joint patrol over the Bering Sea. It's unclear how far off Alaska's coast this interception occurred. NORAD said it was beyond Alaska's airspace. It said in a statement, quote, "The Russian and PRC aircraft remained in international airspace and did not enter American or Canadian sovereign airspace. This Russian and PRC activity in the Alaska ADIZ is not seen as a threat, and NORAD will continue to monitor competitor activity near North America and meet presence with presence," end quote. And this came just a few days after Russia said that it intercepted 2 American B-52 bombers near its territorial border over the Barents Sea in the Arctic. All right. So the last story here, EU countries call for engagement with the Syrian government. So this is interesting. 8 European Union countries are calling on the 27-nation bloc to reconsider its policy towards Syria and suggested engaging directly with the Syrian government of President Bashar al-Assad. So in a letter to Josep Borrell, who's the EU's foreign policy chief, the foreign ministers of Austria, Croatia, Cyprus, Czech Republic, Greece, Italy, Slovakia, and Slovenia said their goal is a more active and outcome-driven and operational Syria policy. They said, quote, "This would allow us to increase our political leverage and the effectiveness of our humanitarian assistance," end quote. One of the suggestions made in the letter was to create an EU Syrian envoy that would engage directly with the Assad government and other regional actors. The EU cut off relations with Assad back in 2011 and maintained sanctions on Syria along with the U.S. The U.S. has said, Blinken has said the purpose of these sanctions is to present the reconstruction of Syria. So it's an economic war against the country, and naturally it has a very devastating impact on civilians. It's economic war against civilians. So they These EU members suggested that they should assess the impact that the sanctions are having on ordinary Syrians, and the economic campaign against Syria has contributed to migrants continuing to seek refuge in Europe, and they're saying that they should try to create the conditions for the return of migrants, and that would involve improving the economic situation. And there's a quote here from Austria's foreign minister who acknowledged that, Assad's not going everywhere. The regime change effort against Assad has failed. And this is interesting because, we've seen Saudi Arabia, Jordan, regional Arab countries, Turkey and Syria are in talks about it, but that's probably still a long way off because Turkey's still occupying Syria, northern Syria. But these countries are all talking about it and reestablishing ties with the Assad government. This is the first time I've seen like a Western country that, severed ties, talking about this. And it's 8 EU members. Probably, nothing might come of it for a little while, but it just goes to show it's a failed regime change effort. And even though the U.S. says it's really opposed to normalization, to other countries' normalizing with Syria, they haven't been able to stop, this trend of the Arab countries doing it. All right. So that is it for the news for today. Please go check out our viewpoints. One from Mohammed Sahimi. U.S. gives a war criminal the honor of speaking to Congress. One from Doug Bandow. Will Americans stop trying to run the world? One from Gregory Daddis. Will military budget boosters ever say when? One from Danica Katovich. A standing ovation for genocide. And one from Gideon Levy. In Gaza, Israel lost what remained of its humanity. So please go check everything out. That's it for me for this week. You could always support this show just by sharing it. Tell your friends about antiwar.com. Like, subscribe, comment. All that stuff really helps out. I will be back after the weekend. I hope everybody has a good one. Thanks for listening.